So, I have something to show you.
Taken last week, huh?
That's very kind of you. That is my high school graduation picture. Don't I look like I'm about 12?
You still do.
Oh, that's sweet. I know you had eye surgery this week. I was 5 feet tall. I attended a high school in Columbus, Ohio, and we were always 5 years behind whatever was going on in the rest of the world. So we were just getting the news that integration had happened. And so my high school was a fierce place because we were white people and black people trying to get to know each other and trying to figure out how to live together. Did I mention I was 5 feet? And the standout people in my high school were not the 5 feet tall people. So I was not the captain of the football team, nor was I the center of the basketball team, nor did I pitch or catch or play first or second or third base or infield or outfield for the baseball team. My job was to stay out of everybody's way because I was 5 feet tall. And 5 feet tall people got pushed and they got shoved and they got made example of by people who were trying to make a name for themselves. We got bullied. I don't mean to say I didn't have a good life. I had a great life in high school. I ended up being the valedictorian of my class. I sang in the choir. I got to accompany singers, but that was my safety. The rest of the time I spent being as flexible as I could to stay and dodge getting pushed around and to keep myself as short as possible to avoid any kind of notice. If somebody made a short joke, I was the first one to laugh. Yeah, sure. If somebody made a black joke, I was the first one. Oh yeah, black, I'm pretty dark. I know. Please God, don't let them make a gay joke. That was my high school, trying to stay short and complex, trying to stay flexible. Zacchaeus was short. Zacchaeus was flexible. Zacchaeus had a lot of things going on. We don't know a lot about him, but we know these two things about him. He was not only the tax collector in Jericho, he was the chief tax collector. So he had a staff. He had people working for him. He wasn't like the tax collector we talked about last week, who had to go out and take the money out of poor, starving widows' homes and food away from children. Zacchaeus had people to do that because he was sitting pretty. He had a staff. Secondly, we know Zacchaeus was rich because the text tells us that. What we know about the tax collectors in Jericho is not only were they allowed to collect over and above to stuff their own coffers, the Jericho officials were in on it, so they actually raised the taxes above where they were supposed to be so they could get a cut also. So all of them were getting rich together. As a result of that, you might imagine, I certainly do, Zacchaeus wasn't very well liked. And being short of stature, he had to be compact, and he had to be flexible, and he had to keep his life, he had to protect himself. I can't imagine that he was walking down the street and every once in a while he'd get shoved and wonder, where did it come from? Or he would not want to meet some tall person that he had swindled money out of in an alley and get a little pushed around. So Zacchaeus was probably, even though his life was great, like mine, he was watching his back. But on this day, he was agitated because everybody was out to see this famous Son of Man and Son of God who was coming to Jericho. And Zacchaeus wanted to see him too, but he couldn't because he was compact. And Zacchaeus was running around trying to find a vantage point. How can I see him? Where can I see him? Where can I go to see him? 19th century theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher says that we seek to see Jesus even before we see Jesus when something inside of us yearns for something we don't have. We yearn for that peace, for that wholeness, for that completeness, for that part of something that completes us that we don't have. And so we go on a search trying to see what we can't see. And it feels like Zacchaeus had extra energy. He was trying to see. And so he said, I know, I'll climb up in a tree. And onward came Jesus. And Zacchaeus saw him. But more importantly, Jesus saw Zacchaeus. And more importantly than that, Jesus knew Zacchaeus by name. He knows my name. And more importantly than that, Jesus said, Zacchaeus, you come down because I'm, you know the end of the song, going to your house today. He had something for Zacchaeus to do. And Zacchaeus came down, released, grateful that he was released from whatever it was that was burdening him, that was keeping him from seeing Jesus the way he wanted to. Grateful to enter into new life with Jesus. Grateful. The simple story that many of us have known since children tells us many things. First of all, we see Jesus doing what Jesus always does. Putting out Jesus' hand to the outsider. Amen? Amen. Jesus has healed thieves. Jesus has healed the lame. Jesus has healed those who cannot hear. Jesus has healed as women of the night. Mm-hmm. Jesus has healed everybody. But the twist in this story is Jesus puts Jesus' hand out to a person who is persecuting other people. Zacchaeus was not a nice person. He was hurting people. He was taking money that people needed to live for his own pleasure. People were probably dying and going without. Zacchaeus was a perpetrator. And yet Jesus put out his hand. I want to tell you, I give God thanks and praise for the way my own health care, seems to be positioned right now. After these surgeries, if it were not like this, I would be telling you a vastly different story. Many of us sit in this room wondering how we could pay for something if we were to have disaster happen, how we would pay for health care if something were to happen to us. And we look at the people who would change our health care and we don't like them. We want them to stop. We want them to leave it alone. But Jesus puts out Jesus' hand to a perpetrator. It causes us to recalculate and rethink how we are called to follow Jesus. Are we called to welcome people we don't like? Jesus gets to dinner, and at the dinner, Zacchaeus says, I would like to give half of what I have to the poor. So we know Zacchaeus is going to give up a lot of money. And then he says, as a good Jewish boy would say, if I have defrauded anyone, I will give them back 4 times as much. But what we see in this exchange between Zacchaeus and Jesus is our ethical response to confession and conversion by Jesus. How many of you like that little praise chorus, He Knows My Name? It's a nice little song, isn't it? You know, it's zippy, it's got a nice little beat, and it talks about Jesus seeing us. But we are called to do more than say, oh, there's Jesus seeing me. I'm going to sit quietly, just me and Jesus looking at each other. Yeah, that's Jesus. Yeah, that's good. We are called to ethically respond to Jesus putting out Jesus' hand and seeing us. We are called to give back to the world. The Burbank Temporary Aid Center and the Little White Chapel Pantry and our tithes and our offerings and UNICEF, all of those checks and all of those things we do, we don't just do it because we're nice people. We do it because it's part of our worship of God. Amen? Amen. That's why we do it. That's why we do it. And in this text, Zacchaeus immediately begins his confession by saying, I need to give. You have released me from the horrible things I was doing. Now to be part of where you're going, I need to give. When Zacchaeus came down the tree, he was glad to see Jesus. He was joyful. But the people who watched the whole transaction were not. They said, look at Jesus.
stood out here on this road all day long in the heat trying to wait for him to come. And now he's going off to dinner with somebody who's persecuting him. What kind of Savior is that?
And Jesus responds, today, salvation has come to this house. Salvation has come to this house. And many of the theologians that I study seem to think he means Zacchaeus' house. I'm just crazy enough to think he means the house of Israel. Salvation has come to this house. You and I are called to respond and react to things differently because we are seeing through the eyes of God. We are seeing, our vision is different. It's okay to think how cute those little kids. Any of you see this week the little kids who did the children's strike against climate change? It was wonderful. 11-year-olds talking, saying, please, Mommy, please, Daddy, please, Uncle, please, Auntie, please, Grandma, please, Grandma, give us a world to live in. Leave us a place. And many people say, oh, isn't that so cute? But God bids us look through God's eyes and see what those children are saying. See what we can do to make the world better. It's okay to laugh at the caricatures of political people who are not your favorites. It's okay. I saw a very funny drawing of Elizabeth Warren this week. And ha, 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 ha. And you know, you don't have to look far to see caricatures of President Trump. But God calls us to move past that and be praying for all of them all of the time. They are our leaders and they hold the world that we live in their hands. We need to be praying for them all the time, seriously. Donald Trump doesn't need to be called names in prayer. Donald Trump's name needs to be called out to God in prayer. Because today, salvation has come to this house. So, thanks to your prayers and healing, I'm feeling a little better every day. Thank you all for asking. But there were days last week where I couldn't breathe very well. I was in the office, and I knew that the remedy was to get out of my office chair and just pace up and down in front of the church. And I love taking phone calls. I love doing business. This is such a beautiful street. It's a quiet street, and it's just a wonderful neighborhood. And get some sun. It's great. And it's wonderful to talk to people from back east who are freezing. And it's 80 degrees and I'm walking in front of my church. God bless you. So I was out walking in front of the church. And our UPS guy goes flying by. Now, you have to know our UPS guy. The Little Whitechapel UPS guy is about a 6 foot tall, very buff Latino man, with a wonderful voice, and he comes into the office singing all the time, and how are you, Pastor? How are you, Annette? I have a and I said, do you sing in the choir? Well, I'm just filling the room with his voice and his presence, and it's just wonderful. So I'm walking down the street, and he is flying by in this big truck, you know how they do with the doors open, standing up driving. And I waved at him. He goes, Pastor, I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been? Where have you been? Oh, you look a little thin. And I said, well, I was in the hospital. I had some surgery. The truck stopped and he said, Jesus and his angels surround you right now, and may no harm, hurt, or danger come to you. I stood up a little taller. Because me and Zacchaeus had seen Jesus. God, you were looking at us all the time. And often we can't see because we're not looking back. We thank God for a little man who's needed to see you so badly that he climbed up in a tree. Help us to climb up off our beds of ease and our comfortable couches and our lovely cars and any place that we have that we love to relax. Help us strain to see you more. Help us marvel that you don't look like what we thought you would look like. Help us accept what you have for us to do. In your mighty Son's name we pray.